You've all seen the memes. Someone does something incredibly cool, or brave, or brazen, or just funny. Then the frame freezes and a pair of sunglasses, maybe a hat, or maybe a burning blunt, slides into the frame onto the face of the so-called thug, and "Thug Life" is written on the screen. Whether the meme makers realize it or not, this references back to 90s hip-hop and specifically the group called Thug Life, whose most famous member was the one and only Tupac Shakur. You probably know all this, but what we guess you don't know is the origin of the term thugs and who the first thugs were. The word thug has been around for a long time, and in English-speaking countries, it might be a person who punches you in the face and takes your phone, or maybe someone who swears allegiance to a sports team and is willing to beat you over the head with a metal pipe just because you like a different team. It's an unruly person, a feisty fella, a reprobate, someone who doesn't follow the letter of the law and is often prone to violence and other criminality. That's why the word first became associated with the rap scene, young men who sang about growing up in the impoverished parts of cities and sometimes had to break the law just to survive on the streets. But those guys weren't as bad as the original thugs, people who came from the other side of the world and did a lot worse than those on the mean streets of urban America. The original thugs were outlaws, all right, but they were what you might call professional outlaws. They robbed and killed for bounty, and they did so in a very organized way. The English word is said to have been taken from Hindi and the similar sounding word thug, but many languages across India other than Hindi have a similar word, and they all mean the same thing: a swindler, a crook, a thief, a murderer. These thugs belonged to what was known as Thuggee tribes, and they could be found all across the Indian subcontinent. They were the bandits of India, and similar to the highwaymen of England's past, these bandits could be ruthless. It was the British that brought the word thug home after experiencing Indian thug life for themselves. The stories differ as to what the modus operandi of these gangs was, but most say they would trick travelers into making them think they were friendly so that the travelers would invite them into their group before robbing and killing them. You can trace these guys back as far as the 13th century, but it's after the Europeans hit India and experienced the thug life firsthand that the stories really started to spread. One French writer in the 19th century called the thugs the cunningest robbers in the world, although he probably should have said most cunning. And in the 19th century, the British wrote about how these bandits were utterly ruthless and incredibly smart. Some say the Brits were a little hysterical about how bad thugs were, creating a kind of boogeyman in India that would fill you up with drugged wine and then murder you and your family in your sleep. But there is no doubt these thugs actually existed, and they are well documented over a long span of time. In fact, it's written that between 1826 and 1835, a total of 1,562 thugs were arrested under British crackdown initiatives. It goes without saying that these bands of criminals were not to the liking of the British East India Company, which, if you know anything about Indian history, was a force of law unto itself. According to these documents, of those thugs arrested, 382 got the death penalty, 909 got transportation, meaning they were shipped off to other colonies, and 77 were imprisoned for life. While thuggee gangs might have been different in certain areas of such a large and diverse nation, it's said many of the gangs were organized a bit like a mafia. They had a boss, and below them they had guys that did the killing. It's said that you could become part of a thuggee gang as a matter of birthright, but some people joined out of a matter of necessity. In other words, they were broke. Over time, there were many sects, and it's said that thuggees had many aliases but didn't have a real last name other than their gang name. They were a bit like the Faceless Men in Game of Thrones, and like those assassins, the thuggees sometimes said their killing was actually a sacred service to God. Many thuggees worshiped the Hindu goddess of destruction, Kali. But thuggees, it should be noted, were both Muslim and Hindu. The Kali worship part might just be folklore though, and the bounty is all that really mattered. Most historians do agree that the thugs were masters of disguise, and some have written that the Faceless Men in Game of Thrones were at least partly inspired by the thuggees of India. As we said, this had been going on for centuries, but during British rule over India, there was a massive crackdown, as the East Indian Company, of course, didn't want a cult of murderous robbers getting in the way of business, and said that the thugs were natural-born killers who had to be wiped out. One British captain, partly behind the eradication plan, said this about the cleanup initiative: "The system is destroyed, never again to be associated into a great corporate body. The craft and mystery of thuggee will not be handed down from father to son." When the Brits used words like craft and mystery, it shows how much these thugs captured the imaginations of the people. Over in Britain, word got back about these mysterious villains who encroached on travelers or villages and took their valuables and lives, and the stories grew much like the stories of those fabled highwaymen. That's how the word thug made it into the English language. A book was written by an Englishman at the time called Confessions of a Thug, and in it were tales about daring feats and crafty bands of men, ritualistic murder, and chilling crimes committed by this clever cult. You only have to read the introduction to that book for spine-tingling descriptions of what some of these traveling gangs would do. It describes how they would arrive at a village, and there they would set up camp. After this, they'd get to know the people, becoming friendly, and then they'd wait until the time was right and pounce. They took everything and tried their utmost to leave no traces behind by burying the dead. The book became a 19th century bestseller and helped popularize the term so much that today, when you watch videos with the title Thug Life, you've got 19th century Indian criminals and British writers to thank. The Brits wrote that these gangs of assassins would then leave and either join caravans they thought they could overwhelm or head to another village. This is what we mean when we say that the thugs became the boogeyman of India. Imagine hearing tales of how one day some new folks might move into a town. They seem nice enough at first, but then suddenly they're robbing everyone, and by the time they leave, they've killed everyone. As we said, they did this by being very clever deceivers, sometimes posing as holy men, royalty, soldiers, or merchants, so the caravans or villages had no idea what was coming to them. It was a matter of honor for the thugs to let no one escape alive once they had been selected for death, states one account, but adds that this was a slow process because they didn't want a bloody mess, and so oftentimes they would just strangle everyone. Other sources mention poisoning sometimes being an option, and it was just the new young thugs who did the killing. It was an honor to become the resident strangler in the gang, the assassin, an honor that often only came late in life. Only the men of the gang did the killing though, while the girls and women took care of the day-to-day business. For all their breaking of customs, it appears that the glass ceiling was still firmly in place. The word thug then traveled to the US, with the writer Mark Twain being partly responsible for the word's migration. He took a particular interest in what he might call the sinister culture of the thugs of India, writing in an 1839 quote, "You've surmised from the listed callings followed by the victims of the thugs that nobody could travel the Indian roads unprotected and live to get through, that the thugs respected no quality, no vocation, no religion, nobody, that they killed every unarmed man that came in their way." Twain, who was certainly a skeptic if there ever was one, wrote about how white men were also thugs. They just did their killing in other ways. For him, there were official thugs and what we might call today street thugs. Twain was also very skeptical of the Brits, saying they had wiped out this scourge so quickly. For him, it was a work of public relations. Twain wrote, "The day that sees this far-spread evil completely eradicated from India and known only in name will greatly tend to immortalize British rule in the East." British rule certainly wasn't immortal, and it's still debated just how bad the Thuggees were and if the Brits really were that great at eradicating the so-called evil. Critics say that the Brits exaggerated the thug problem. Reports differ widely, but some sources say the Thuggees may have killed as many as 2 million people over the years. But we're talking over centuries. The Brits put the body count of thug killing at around 40,000 in just the early part of the 19th century. While these numbers really are an estimation, many think that the thugs killed more people than any other gang that ever existed. So the next time you see one of those edited videos that claim to be about thug life, spare a thought for the original thugs, the traveling bandits, bane of the British Empire, what some historians call the world's first mafia. What do you think about this tale of thuggery? Tell us in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, These Missing People Were Mysteriously Found Alive. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.